In this video, we'll explore the main interface elements that make up the Unity editor. Our objectives will be to explore the project, scene, game, and inspector views, and understand the difference between game assets, game objects, and components. Okay, I'm going to continue where we left off with the last video. So we have the Solar System project open, our Unity editor is all configured, and the Solar System assets are imported. So we've already looked a little bit at the project tab here. This shows the files and folders that make up this project. These files are actually called game assets in Unity. There's a one-to-one relationship in what you see in the project panel and what is actually in the file system. So for example, any asset here, I can actually select and then right click and say show in Explorer. Here on Windows, on the Mac, it would say show in Finder. And if I do that, you can see I've got various files right here. And you can see sort of the file mapping here. My project was called Solar System, and within that is an assets folder. So if I back out from the sounds folder, you'll see the various folders that we imported in the last video. And if I back out one step further, you can see this is actually the overall Unity project. So the assets is where you put all of your files and folders. While you can copy new assets directly into the assets folder, within the Explorer or within the Finder. And when you open Unity, those will then be automatically imported. And that's a fine way of importing assets into your project, or you could just drag and drop them if you have Unity opened. I do recommend renaming or moving files from within the project tab in the Unity editor rather than doing it in the file system. This will ensure that any connections to game assets will be maintained within the editor by Unity itself. There are various other folders you see here as part of your Unity project. If you ever want to copy your project, you want to copy this entire folder. All these are very important, but generally you will never actually go in and modify anything within these other folders. Those are all maintained by Unity itself. So let's go back to the Unity editor. Just a few other things about the project panel here. You can actually search for things right here. So if I start to type texture, you can see anything with the word texture will come up down here, and it actually shows a preview if you do that. And there's various more complicated ways of searching that you'll discover later in the course. Let me back out by canceling that. And you can also see there's a little plus here. If I click that, you can see there are various game assets that I could actually create, including a folder, which would be just like creating a folder in Explorer or the Finder. So within our projects panel, remember I said there is a scenes folder that was given to us with a sample scene. So let me go ahead and double click on that, which will open the sample scene. And let's talk a little bit about the scene view over here. The scene view allows you to navigate the 3D world, as well as select and manipulate what Unity calls game objects in the scene. You can think of the scene view as your visual editor for the current game level or scene. Let's start by creating a sphere in our scene. So there is a game object menu at the top. Let me click on that, and you can see I can go down to 3D objects, and I'm going to create a sphere. And the sphere shows up here in my scene view. And once again, this sphere is called a game object. Anything that you see in your scene view is a game object. You can manipulate game objects within the scene view. So you can see it's selected, and I've got these little arrows here, which represent the various axes. So I can grab the y-axis and drag it up or down. I can grab the x-axis and go left and right, or I can grab the z-axis and go sort of in and out. There's various ways of manipulating things within the scene view using your mouse or using your keyboard. You will learn these as you go. For example, I've been left clicking to select things. If you right click, you can see I get this little eye here, and I'm kind of panning around what I'm seeing. If I use the scroll wheel on my mouse, I can zoom in or zoom out. If I hold down the Alt key and then left click, I'm rotating around the object that is selected here. You can see that. If I hold down the Alt key and then press the middle mouse button, this is another way to kind of like pan the whole world around. And if I hold down the Alt key and right click, this is another way to kind of move in and move out, just like using the scroll wheel. Another nice shortcut is whatever is selected, whatever game object is selected, if you hit the F key on the keyboard, it will kind of zoom in and center on that game object, which is very helpful, you know, when you've got hundreds of game objects in your scene or thousands and you want to zoom right in on one specific one. Another thing that you can do really in any view is with the mouse within that view, if you hold down Shift and space, it will make that view full screen, or at least full screen within the window of the editor. If you want to return back, once again, hold Shift and then space, and it will minimize that, and you'll see all the other panels. There are a lot of interface elements here within the scene view. You can see the little gizmo up here in the corner. This is basically shows what we're looking at. Right now I'm in a perspective view. If I tap on the Y, now I'm in a top-down view, and you know, you can basically tap these to kind of rotate around the object, and then you can kind of see what view you're looking at. Here now I'm on a bottom view, and then once again, if I want to change back to kind of a perspective view, I can hold down the Alt and then rotate around. I can use the scroll wheel to zoom back out and so forth. So this is sort of a quick way of changing your view around as you go. And just like the project panel, I can also search for things within my scene. So I can search for example, sphere, and it will isolate anything with the name sphere. And then there's various other options along here that you'll discover, as you go. One other quick thing that I want to show in the scene view is if I once again select my game object here, there are various tools along the top here that allow you to modify the game object in certain ways. So the first option here is the move tool, and with that selected, we can basically grab the little gizmos that are coming off here, the little axes, to manipulate it. Or if you click in the middle, this allows me to, let me change my perspective here. It allows me to grab that little box and manipulate it that way as well. Or if you kind of select on the edge, you can move in all axes at the same time, or two axes in the same time. The next tool over is the rotate tool. So if I select that, you can see that my gizmos changed around the game object. Now I've got the rotation gizmos, so I can select that and actually rotate this. It's kind of hard to tell because I'm a sphere, and as you rotate the sphere, you can't really tell at this point because I don't have any texture on it or anything. But you can see as I'm dragging, it's showing me the angle it's going to change, and when I release, we can't really tell, but you can tell the gizmos themselves are rotating. So you can select the X, Y, and Z to rotate around that. And then the next option is the scale tool, and these work the same way. So I can pick a particular axis and scale it in that direction. Or let me just undo here. You can always undo here in the editor. So let me undo my scale change. If you select in the middle, it will scale all three at the same time. So that's kind of one quick way visually to make something bigger. And there's a few other tools that we'll explore over time. I also want to show these next two buttons. These will become more relevant later, but one basically says center. If I tap it, it will change the pivot. So this basically is how the object is manipulated. Are you moving it based on the center of the game object, or are you moving it based on the pivot point that is maybe set within a 3D modeling program? We'll talk more about that later. The next option over right now is grayed out because I'm on the scale tool. Let me move back to the move tool. You can see it says local. Notice the coordinate system, since I rotated, is kind of cocked. So the center of the object is rotated, so you can see my axes are rotated. If I click local, it's going to switch to global, and now it's showing the axes in regard to, or in respect to, the world itself, not the object. So if I want to, in this rotation, if I want to move it straight up in the world, I would do that based on the global coordinate system, not the local coordinate system. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next video. So let me just switch this back to local for now. Below the scene view in the 2x3 layout is the game view. Notice the game view is sort of a different view on the game than the scene view. So we're both looking at the sphere here. One is zoomed in, and we can see detail on that when it's selected. Once again, the scene view is where we manipulate things. The game view is what the player sees through the current active camera. You cannot actually edit the scene through the game view. You can only preview the scene. The game view becomes most useful while playing your game. So notice at the top of the Unity editor, we have a play button here. When we click the play button, we enter play mode, and you can notice that the overall interface sort of dimmed a little bit, and I'm in play mode. And while I'm in play mode, I'm actually previewing what the player will see in the game. Right now, we haven't really set up a game or set up a project to really do anything, so it doesn't look any different than not playing, but this is how we will preview things in the future. So let me click the play again to exit play mode. So a couple other things here in the game view. One of those is maximize on play. So if I click maximize on play, and then whenever I hit that play button, notice the game view becomes full screen. And this is, just a nice way to preview your game. When you're in play mode, it comes full screen, so you can kind of immerse yourself like a player is immersed when playing. And if I, click the play button to stop again, it goes back to the normal edit view. And once again, that's a nice way to know when you're in play mode versus in edit mode, because those are two distinct things. You generally don't want to edit your world while you're in play mode. You actually can edit your world, but if you do, as soon as you hit stop, it will go back to the layout that was set up prior to playing. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. A couple other important things in the game view, where it says free aspect for me. If I click that, this is a way that we can set up aspect ratios for our game. So for example, if we're making a game for a 16:9 display, we would select 16:9. Now if I play, I still have maximize on play selected. It will open in a 16:9 aspect ratio, like we might have on a high definition television, for example. Let me exit play. And there's various other settings here too. You can actually set pixel dimensions. So if you know an exact pixel dimension that you want to set it at, you can do that. So right now there's one setting for 1024 by 768, which is a common resolution size. You can also hit the plus here and set your own. So right now I can select either aspect ratio or fixed resolution. And so for example, I might do something like 1920 by 1080, which is the common 4K resolution. So I can label this 4K display and then say OK. And then I have that setting there. And this is going to preview at 920 by 1080. But notice it will scale it down if I don't have enough pixels to actually show it at full scale. So once again, this is a very handy thing. If you don't care about the aspect ratio or the resolution, you could just leave that at free aspect during editing and then change that as you go. Once again, we already talked about maximize and play. You can turn on or turn off. You can also mute the audio if you don't want the audio to play. When you hit the play, it's never going to play, in edit mode, but when you hit play, you may want to mute the audio. There's also a nice little stats panel here, which shows various performance statistics as the game plays. So it'll show like your frames per second and things like that. We'll talk more about these statistics later. And that is the game view. Let's talk next about the hierarchy view. This is a hierarchical list of game objects that are in the scene. Right now, we don't have a lot of things in our scene, but we do have 3 things. From the hierarchy, you can select game objects. So for example, I can select the main camera, I can select the directional light here, or I can select the sphere. And there really is a one-to-one relationship between the scene view and the hierarchy. So if I select off and then select here, you can see it's selected over in the hierarchy. Or if I select in the hierarchy, it selects it in the scene view. And once again, remember, whatever is selected, I can tap F on the keyboard and it will sort of zoom to show that object. So once again, if I select the sphere and tap F, it's going to zoom into that game object. Now, game objects can potentially have child game objects. So for example, let's drag the directional light here in the hierarchy into the sphere. drag and drop it, and you can see now it sort of shows that hierarchical relationship there. So I have the sphere, and then the child is the directional light. We've got a little cascade arrow down here, which you can close. If you close it, the directional light is still there. It's just, closed here in the hierarchy. If I open it back up, you can see the child. So in this case, in sort of Unity terminology, we would say the parent of the directional light is the sphere. A child of the sphere is the directional light. We'll talk more about this parent-child relationship as we go, but for now you can clearly see this relationship in the hierarchy view. Last but not least, let's discuss the inspector view over here. The inspector will show details on whatever is selected. So let me select the sphere game object in the hierarchy or the scene. So you can see over in the inspector, we see details on the sphere. So at the very top, you can see the name. I can actually edit it here and call this, planet or something like that. And you can see by changing it there, it changed it here in my hierarchy. And as we look at the inspector, you can see these various sections here. And each of these sections are called components. So game objects are made up of components, which you can modify in the inspector. So for example, every game object has a transform component that defines the position, the rotation, and the scale of the game object. And you can see over here in the scene view, as I, for example, move this, the numbers change over there in the inspector. So you can see the position changing as I'm moving up and down here. And you can also change them directly in the inspector. So I can, go ahead and type 1 here, and you can see it moved over in the scene view. So once again, there's kind of like a one-to-one relationship between things that you edit here in the inspector and the effect, within your scene. Now notice the little question mark at the kind of the top of each of these components. That is a quick way to bring up the Unity documentation about the respective component. So for example, for the transform, let me click that. And this brings up the Unity documentation on the transform component. So I can go ahead and read about the details and so forth there. So this is a great way to learn about various component settings as you work with Unity. Okay, as a quick review, we have game objects in the scene view and in the hierarchy. If we select a game object, we can see the components that are attached to the game object over here in the inspector, and we can edit their values there. We can preview and test the game in the game view by clicking the play button, and then of course we can hit the play button again to stop. And we see all of the project files or game assets in the project panel. And that's just a very quick overview of the Unity interface. Once again, as we go, we will dive into other features. There's a lot of depth here, but that is a quick overview.